What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and it's Tuesday, so it's time for another top 10 video. My patrons voted, and the runner-up from last week was top 10 mechanics I want in D&D 5e. So I will preface this and say a variety of folks, whether on the DMs Guild and other third-party published things, people putting things out for free on Reddit or other things, have developed means to combat most of the things that I'm going to suggest here. But these are official mechanics that I'd like to see in 5e. In theory, the thought process behind this, or not in theory, I guess, well, both, is I would like these mechanics to come from Wizards of the Coast. One, therefore, them acknowledging that these are things that need to exist in the game, and it's sort of a failing of the game not having them. And two, this should be also, in theory, balanced with what they consider to be the overall balance of the game. Whereas I can come up with a mechanic to deal with one of these, or you can come up, or somebody else can. We have what our own internal idea of balance is, but honestly, who knows the balance of the game better than the people who created it? I could argue, and you could argue as well, that maybe they don't know the balance of the game, but for argument's sake, let's say they do. They created it. They're the one who continue to create content for the game officially, so we want it from them. Like I said, tons of folks, and feel free to sound off in the comments if you'd like to tell people what you use to combat the various mechanics that I'll reference here. But yeah, that's it. There's stuff that are lacking or missing, some mechanic that there's a hole there, or something I'd like to see in 5e that's not. Number 10. Retraining. Now, this is not necessarily a super complex thing to see, but I'd like to see how Wizards of the Coast would handle it. And we kind of saw a little bit of it, which maybe it's coming in a future installment, but we kind of got a little preview of what I think it could be from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And the concept of retraining is basically, at some point, you might take something or have some ability that you got at an earlier level that you find out is no longer useful, or has extended, you've gotten some ability or something else, and you finds out that it's duplicative and you don't need it anymore, so you want to get rid of this thing to get something else, right? You had a feat at level 1 that you took as a variant human, and then by the time you hit level 6 or, 10, you find out that that feat is useless. Now, again, it could be as simple as a DM just saying, hey, yeah, I'll let you swap it out. And we saw things with certain of the feats in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that are like, oh, when you get an ability score improvement level, you can swap this for something else. And I think that that's definitely on the right track, but I'd like to see it for more than just feats, for proficiencies. We have the ability to swap proficiencies at character creation versus racial proficiencies and class proficiencies. But what about down the line, right? What about if I have all of these proficiencies from being an elf, right? I have longbow, shortbow, short sword, longsword, and then at level 10, I multi-class into fighter, which should give me all martial weapons. Well, I have all of those now. Can I swap out the racial ones that I had? Technically, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything customizing your origin only happens at character creation, not 10, 11 levels down the line. Again, simple fixes just allow that, but I'd like to see how they handle it and see if they have any other funky, weird mechanics to go with it. Again, it's high on the list because it's pretty easy to overcome. Number 9. Skill points or skill tricks or skill challenges. I also put this one high up on the list because I recognize that it's not really feasible with the way skills are handled in 5th edition with the concept of proficiency and otherwise. Now, I know this is obviously needs you to change that possibly, and I think it just gets too muddy and you just have to kind of throw it out. But basically, one of the things I liked about earlier editions was the concept of skill points. Not only did it make intelligence a more useful ability score for those that are not just intelligence-based casters, but it allowed you to be better at something than you would normally be. So the concept would be, if I, for lack of a better term, in 5e had proficiency in stealth, let's say, I would be able to put points into that in a 1-to-1. So let's say at level 1, the most skill points I could put in stealth would be 6, because my class gives me kind of proficiency with stealth. So I could put skill points in there, so I'd have a 6. So I put 6 points in there. Then when I go to make my d20 roll, I have the 6, right? Again, you'd add your ability modifier, but we'll just keep the number at 6. Well, if I wasn't proficient in stealth, I could put I think it was up to like 2 less, or let's say half of whatever the maximum you normally could put in at level 1. So if we're saying the max you could put in is 6, the minimum or the maximum you could put in if you weren't proficient would be 3, but it's bought at 2 to 1. So rather than putting in 6 skill points to get to a stealth proficiency or a stealth score of 6, I would be able to put in 6 points to get to 3, which would be the max for me as someone not proficient. One, that would make, it would still mean that even though I'm a paladin in heavy armor, we didn't have disadvantage and stuff back then, but like I could still train to try to be good at this, and I could, again, as I leveled up, that cap, that 6 or 3 number would increase. So I could continue to try to put points into it to show that my character is training and getting better in this. And that would be, and again, this would be applied across all skills, not just stealth. I like that. I like that it could show that I could work hard and try to do relatively well at a given thing. Skill tricks were something else where you could spend skill points to do funky specific maneuvers. There were a variety of different ones out there. They were, and again, it was a function of skill points. It doesn't necessarily translate well to 5e, but I had skill points and I could put them in skills that I would normally have, or I could basically buy a trick. Like, let's say I bought an acrobatics trick, and that would be something that when I get knocked prone, as my reaction, I could stand up from prone, kind of doing like a martial arts kind of flip up. And that would be something that I might spend 5 skill points on to buy that skill trick. And that's the trade-off, is I spent 5 skill points to be able to reactionary stand up if I'm knocked prone, assuming that I have my reaction, but I gave up potentially 5 points in a skill I could put, or other skills I could put elsewhere, right? That could potentially take, if I was proficient in stealth, like we just discussed, and I didn't have any proficiency, I could have gone from a 0 stealth to a 5 stealth, but instead I sacrificed those points to give myself that cool maneuver. And there were a variety of different things you could do, but that's just one that I could think of. And the last one is skill challenges, which is, again, something that some folks have done, like I said, I think on the DM's Guild. And I think this was more of a 4E thing, but it was kind of skill challenges and group skill checks where, a challenge presents itself and a bunch of people roll, and, you determine the overall success for the challenge as a group. And there may be 5th edition mechanics for that, but I don't think they're widespread. And I would just like to see a revitalization of this skill concept. And again, this might be something that I don't think is really viable in 5e. I think it's either going to come from a 6e or just go back to playing 3-5. But it addresses the concept that in some instances, it's easier for folks who are, whether they have advantage on checks from racial abilities, things, they have access to stuff like guidance, enhance ability, or they're just really hot when it comes to rolling, that folks that are untrained or unproficient in a given skill can potentially roll better than folks who are. So let's say I'm the fighter and I have history because I was in the military and I studied stuff. My intelligence score is a 10, but I'm proficient in history. And let's say we're at level 3, right? So my proficiency bonus is a 2. Well, the wizard, who has an 18 intelligence, is untrained in history, but has a +4. So he's already better than me at history because he's just naturally smarter, and I took the time to be proficient in it. And that would have been the concept of where those skill points might have been able to help. I could have dumped skill points in that to make up for my low ability score. Number 8. Mass combat rules. We had at least 1, if not 2, unearthed arcanas that were trying to address the concept of mass combat. Now, I recognize that there was a snippet about it in, I think, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, and I know, like I've said, I think you have Strongholds and Followers, and a bunch of other sources have attempted to do mass combat, and we had, I think it was 2 unearthed arcanas over the course of the past 6 or 7 years that have been about mass combat. And it's clearly because it's something that Wizards of the Coast would like to add to the game. They've done it in previous editions. And it's a staple of a fantasy genre, right? The epic, overarching story of a mass combat. Think about any kind of major fantasy. Think about like Lord of the Rings, right? Epic fantasy, mass combat where armies are clashing against armies. Yeah, you zoom in down to the ground level and you focus in on a couple of the heroes as you see them doing stuff. But other people are fighting all around them, and you can get the morale of the troops and routing and all these other kinds of things that are really interesting. I tried to recently run a mass combat thing in my homebrew campaign using the most recent set of mass combat rules. And depending on the scenario, it can get wildly just impossible for people to win. Like, you might have a group of townsfolk or guards, but based on their challenge rating versus the potential challenge rating of the enemies you've established, it could just basically essentially be impossible for the townspeople to win. And I recognize that might be the case in some of these instances, but like in a pure numbers game, there's no way they will win. It's not like the plucky heroes that somehow find a way to win in the movies or in a fantasy novel or something. No, just the numbers say, even if these guys were to roll on fire, the number will just eventually, they'll just get obliterated. End of story. So good mass combat rules that work well, I think would be fun. And I think if they were introduced in like a DMG2 or something like that, people would adopt them and they would be attempt to be used. There was even an Adventure League module that used the mass combat rules, the most recent Unearthed Arcana version, and I thought it was handled pretty well. Number 7. Good travel mechanics? I don't really think there's good travel mechanics. Like, the closest thing we have to decent travel mechanics for the wilderness is included on a DM screen that you have to buy separately. That's not one of the original DM screens that you might have had. It's not in an existing book. Yeah, it's just, I don't think there's great overland travel rules. They've added some stuff in recent books. You have some hex scroll rules in Tomb of Annihilation. There's some other stuff in Icewind Dale. But there's a reason why I know so many different folks have made resources about third-party DMs Guild or otherwise, about how to handle overland tracking and travel and all this kind of stuff to make it move along and not feel like a slog, but also be interesting and unique enough that you do feel like the characters are on a journey. Number 6. Epic levels. Again, there are plenty of folks that have done amazing things with coming up with the concept of epic levels. And for those of you who don't know what I mean, that's characters who are beyond level 20. As we know, the standard book goes from levels 1 to 20, or the standard, we have in 5e. But in older editions, there were concepts to go to level 20 and beyond. There were entire resources, books, monster compendiums, and things like that for you to go beyond level 20. In the Dungeon Master's Guide, it basically is like, oh, get some epic boons, but there's no changes to, like, you're still stuck with whatever you had. If you follow the main, follow the player's handbook, your sorcerer is still stuck with their 12 or 15 or whatever spells they have. Even if they hit level 20, it doesn't really change too much for them. And it would be nice to see that progression. Like I said, there are great resources out there to give you the best attempts you can, but I feel like folks are invested in 5e, and some folks have told me, I've heard, that they've played their campaigns from levels 1 to 20. So they got their characters to the end, and they like to keep playing those characters at the high levels that they're at. But there's no real options for them to do so other than like one-shot adventures here and there. So maybe this is something they'll reserve for the eventual 6e, which I have heard rumors through the industry that it is coming in the next 2 to 6 years. But yeah, I'd like to see it now, but I highly doubt we're going to get it. Number 5. Knowledge checks. This was something I also used to really like. Now there's skills we have that could work for this, right? Arcana, history, nature, things like that. But we had all of these different knowledge skills in older editions, right? Knowledge Arcana, knowledge Dungeoneering, knowledge the Planes, whatever. But the important thing was, in our monster books, each monster would basically have, or each important thing would have different little sections about the lore of that thing and it would tell you, hey, if you roll a DC 10 Arcana check, you know this about the monster. If you roll a DC 15 Arcana check, you know this about the monster. And if you roll a DC 20 or 25 check about it, you know all of this about the monster. And it was a great way for you to, especially if you had new players or players unfamiliar with the setting or the creatures you're introducing, it would mean, and it felt good because it would be like, oh, hey, me as the studied wizard who studied demonology or studied the arcane or aberrations or whatever, and we encounter one, I can make a check and there's predetermined things that I need to know. It's not basically up to me to say, do I know anything about this, DM? And the DM says, I don't know, make an Arcana check, I guess. And you're like, cool, 20. And then the DM's just like, well, I mean, I guess you know it's an aberration, right? You can kind of tell it looks a little alien. You know what other aberrations are, right? You've heard of beholders, you've heard of mind flayers, so you know they're not of this world or they're alien in some way and their anatomy is funky, but that's really all you know. Because the book doesn't tell you. It could, like the old editions would say, here's what you know. You know that maybe their main attack is this or that. And it's really completely up to the DM. And I understand that the DM can change this and alter this, but sometimes we just don't want to have to do all that work for ourselves. We had the book tell us what to do and gave us that information. Now, I recognize that that would also add significantly more length to the books, adding those paragraphs for every monster. I think it's a good idea. Also, it definitely helps new DMs who don't really know what to give away. Do I give away the monster's stat block? Do I give away its resistances? What about its form of attacks? I have the lore bit, but then it's just like if I was flipping through the monster manual and I was like, oh, I'm going to use this monster, and then they want to know about it, then I have to stop if I didn't read ahead of time. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I was looking at CR. They looked at, challenge rating 5 monsters, and I picked one to throw at the party. Or I looked at one based on terrain. Or I just like the picture. I think this one looks cool. Let me throw this at my party. And then you're like, oh, shit, well, now I have to read the entire lore block to tease out information to give them. Whereas I had a quick hit bulleted list that I could have on the go at any time I needed it. Number 4. Actual good rules for creating classes or subclasses in the game. The closest thing we have is in the Dungeon Master's Guide under the Creating a New Character Options section. We have this paragraph about creating new class options, right? That's it. This is all we get in the entirety of the DMG. There is more information about substituting class features, restricting class access has even more information. There's more stuff about how to change what Wizards already gave you to just reskin it and reuse it to fit into this. There's a whole section on how to create a new race where they made the original Eladrin or the new sub-race and they actually gave you an example. And there's basically a paragraph or 2 about how to create new class options and then 3 posed questions. I would like a full resource that taught me how to make a new subclass or a new class altogether. Now, I recognize they're probably not going to do that because they're very strict on their limited classes, but I would like something extensive that could give me real insight into the mindset of the DMs and the creators of the game as to what they use. Now, you could probably argue maybe they don't know what's needed to make new classes and subclasses, as the power creep seems to be real, where new options seem to completely invalidate old subclasses, or some classes in general are invalidated by other classes, subclasses. That's entirely possible, but I would like a good resource from the first-party people who made it to allow me to do my best to stay within what you determine as your boundaries of balance to build my own stuff and do it well. Number 3. Monster harvesting rules. Everybody harvests monsters. You fight a dragon, everybody wants to skin the dragon, take the claws, the teeth, the eyeballs, the heart, whatever they want to do. Everybody wants to just basically pick this dragon skeleton clean. Now, it's not just with dragons, but that's the most common example. And there are no rules for harvesting dragon parts or any monster parts for that matter. So I think you need to have a set of rules. Like a lot of us say, we'll use survival, maybe use intelligence. You could maybe use medicine. If you have leather working tools or something, maybe you can use that to kind of take the hide off of the thing. What are the case? What do I get, right? What do I get with the bits? How do I know how many bits I get? How do I buy and sell the bits? Because ultimately, if people are taking, like, if there's nobody that can make dragon or wants dragon scale mail, let's say, which again, we'll get to that in a second, or they have all these dragon, pieces, can I use these as substitutes for material components for my spells? Yeah, in theory, that sounds awesome. It makes total sense. There ain't no rules for it. There's no useful things to do with the monster bits because there's no rules on how to harvest them. There's no rules on what to do with them. There's no rules on how much to charge or sell for any of these things. And again, we had this stuff. We even had books dedicated to specific monster bits and how to sell and buy and use them. I think that this would be huge. Again, there's an entire series of books out there on the DM's Guild about harvesting and crafting from harvested bits because Wizards of the Coast doesn't have official rules for it. Number 2. Coming on the heels of that, crafting in general of any kind, but specifically crafting magic items would be amazing. But even crafting, the crafting rules between the DMG and Xanathar's Guide are just kind of, they're an idea. They're an outline of an idea that was thrown on paper and put in a book to appease people who would want to have it. Give us real crafting rules, give us time frames, give us money, give us tools required, especially for magic items. Don't give us this bullshit that we need a blueprint and then not give us an example of a blueprint. Like, oh, well, you need to find the recipe on how to make the magic item. But we're not going to tell you what you need or how to determine it or give you an example. Or, again, better yet, in older editions, every single magic item would tell you, hey, this is what you need to craft it. You need to have potentially this feat that allows you to craft it. You need to have this much gold in materials. You need to have this kind of magic access. You need to have these items. You need to have this, that, and the other thing, and this is how you craft it. And that was great because it spelled it out for you. Anybody could figure it out. If you wanted to make an NPC who could craft magic items, you knew what kind of stuff they needed to have access to do it. The NPC could tell you, hey, I need you to go find a salamander tail to make this, Ring of the Salamander. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. I'll go figure out where that is and go do that. It's not really an option because we don't really have anything for that. If there was a list that said, hey, if you want to craft boots of flying, you need feathers from the wings of a Pegasus. Well, that's a little questionable. How do you get them? Or you need magic boots made from the skin of a displacer beast. I don't know, whatever. I could at least figure that out. And then, hey, I have that, my crafting rules, and I just established my harvesting rules. So now I can use those two in conjunction to craft things that are useful for me. Again, tons of rules by a variety of different people out there because it's a big, huge thing that's lacking in 5e. Number 1. And probably surprising no one, buying and selling of magic items. Every DM I've ever played with in 5th edition, and I'm sure probably all of them on your end as well, has included a magic item shop because it just makes sense. We're all used to it from video games and other sources, other RPGs, that you can go to a place, Tim's Magic Emporium, whatever the case may be, and you say, oh, okay, I'm looking to buy a +1 magic longsword. Where do I go to find that? Well, the DMG says, yeah, you don't know. Maybe you find one in a treasure hoard. Maybe you discover a recipe that we don't provide you any information on. You can go and craft it. Or maybe the DM just gives it to you because they're feeling nice. There's no real reason to figure out how you can go buy it. But every DM I've ever played in is like, oh yeah, you come into the town. Is there any place I can purchase magic items? Oh yeah, you can go to that place. They sell magic items. We don't know what they have all the time. The inventory changes, but you can go there. And then the DM comes up with well, shit, what do I charge for these magic items? There's no rules for buying and selling magic items in the DMG. There's very long and then expanded upon in Xanathar's Guide arbitrary rules where you need to find somebody, you have to find a buyer, you got to find a fence, you got to do whatever kind of thing you got to do. Then you got to come into the complication. Am I going to get full price? Am I going to get half price? Am I going to get 1.5 times the price? How long is it going to take them to find a buyer? How long is it going to take them to find a source of magic items? All this stuff. Again, older editions, there's a price point. Here you go. You want to buy it? It's 20,000 gold. You want to craft it? It's 10,000 plus materials. I'm good with that. I don't need to have this mystical nonsense about possibly spell plague, possibly magic items are super rare. I don't care. Okay? I don't. I want to know. Everybody wants to know. There's reason that there is a ridiculous amount of magic item books. Some of them on Kickstarter funded into the 6-digit number or more because people want sources of magic items and they want to know how to buy, sell, trade, and craft them. You know, there's a fact that there's been something that's been out almost since the beginning of 5e, which was the sane magic item prices, which was something that was developed for free, and I think it's still out there on Reddit or in a Google Drive, which is just a list of all the SRD magic items with what the people who are working on it determined to be sane magic item prices. Especially if you live in a world where something like a bag of holding could be super useful for your party, but the DMG decides that everything's super rare. Why would anyone ever sell bags of holding? They're one of the most useful items out there. If they're so rare, why would anyone ever give them up? They're super useful. And if you think about it like that, why would anyone ever sell anything? Because they're so rare. But then if they're that rare, you could make so much money off it, but then where's it going to go? And it just, I mean, I would say that I could get behind that if, more so, if the pre-written campaigns that exist don't give out so many different magic items throughout the course of them. Like, if they're supposed to be so rare, why does the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, for example, have so many dragon hordes that you uncover that are just full of magic items? Right? I mean, I've played through a bunch of these, and you go through all these different areas, and you're like, oh, I got this magic item, I got that magic item. The whole party's figuring out what they're swapping for attunements, just playing through a pre-written campaign. Magic items are that rare. Should I have been able to find that many? I don't know. Anyway, that's another rule I'd like to see. Again, buying and crafting and selling of magic items. So let me know your thoughts. Did I touch on any mechanics that you were unaware of or you hadn't known that you wanted in 5e and now you realize you do? Or is there some other mechanics that I didn't cover that you think should be in 5e? I'd love to hear it. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and voting on the topic for this video. I will see you all next time.